25 games into the Pirates season, whose stock is up and whose stock is down?
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you guys might actually recognize a certain somebody sitting to my right today here on the Locked On Pirates podcast. We are rejoined by an old friend of the show, Craig Toth, who I personally got to meet in person this past Saturday. That was a fun little meetup. Sure you guys saw that picture, but welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every single day. My name is Ethan Smith. You can follow me on Twitter right there at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates for all of your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates. And by the way, today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Download the Monopoly Go app free on the App Store and Google Play. I've played it quite a bit over the last couple days. It's very fun. Very good time passer if you're just looking to pass some time before the Buccos are on your television, which they'll be on your television relatively early today. You might even be listening to the show during the game. But Craig, welcome back to the show. How you doing, brother? How's everything going?
Everything's going great, man. Thanks for having me back on. Yeah, my schedule pretty much last season kind of nixed my ability to be on this. No hard feelings for anybody or anything. It's just life kind of catches up with you at some points in time, and it was great to actually meet you in person. I wholeheartedly meant what I said. Love this dude. Listen to his show all the time. Ethan has, been the Locked On host now for forever. We're not 4 years. Wow. So
4 years in October.
Yeah. So the things that if anybody else can do a pirate show 5 days a week, I would challenge them to that, because it is extremely difficult, even if it's a team you're watching every day and that you love.
Yeah. And we've been watching this team that we love and enjoy to watch now for 25 games. And obviously the start of the year was a lot better than what we've seen from the team over the past couple of weeks, about a week and change. But I wanted to talk about really today just the stock up and the stock down on some of these guys. And when you look at how things have been going for this Pittsburgh Pirates team, they sit at 13-12. It's about what I would expect them to sit at, especially with a lot of the road games that they had early, some of the teams they've had to play early, like the Orioles, the Phillies, the Mets, the Red Sox, albeit the Mets and the Red Sox, not exactly a murderer's row of teams, but apparently it was for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And when you're starting on stock up and stock down, I'm talking about players here. I'm not talking about the team, not talking about the other things that might factor in here. And I think a lot of the stock that people have been looking at so far is O'Neal Cruz, who's had quite the start to 2024. When I say quite the start, I mean it kind of in a good way and kind of in a bad way. You're looking at a guy who really going into this year had not played professional baseball in almost a year. And you see where he sits right now. His OPS is a 633, not acceptable for what you want from Cruz. 237 average, 3 home runs, 8 RBIs. But what I find interesting over the last 7 days, slugging 333 and on base at 346, average up to almost 300, has 7 hits and 24 at-bats since sliding down the lineup. Would you say his stock is maybe trending back up, Craig, or do you think that it's maybe just he's finally getting back into his own a little bit?
I would say his stock is trending up. He's striking the ball a lot better, looks a little bit more comfortable. Anybody that watched the game last night against the Brewers, the bullpen game that the Pirates unfortunately lost, you see veterans like Martin Perez getting behind him, joking with him a little bit, kind of making him enjoy the game again. But yeah, I mean, he's hitting the ball a lot better. I feel like he's a lot more comfortable at the plate. For a while there, it just looked like that he was, lost. And he was swinging like at stuff he wouldn't normally swing at, looking at stuff that was right in his wheelhouse, and just kind of has to readjust. And we have to keep reminding ourselves that this is a guy that didn't take a professional plate appearance after what was it, April 9th of last year. So there are going to be some adjustments from that. So I think the stock is going up. I would like to see a little bit more power, has shown that. But I mean, if he's putting the ball straight back up the middle, I think that launch angle and stuff will come naturally. So stock up on him. Hopefully we don't get too many, left-handed pitchers in there at times. But and that was the crazy thing is I don't know if anybody saw that is that, the Pirates started the season going up against 5 left-handers. When Bailey Falter took the mound, that was only the second time the Milwaukee Brewers had seen a left-hander all season. And the number of road games we played, you mentioned, that's just got to be a grind for players.
Yeah. And I thought it was funny that Matt Capps was joking about that with the Brewers and saying they must not have played the Marlins yet, and they have not played the Marlins yet in that regard. I think the big thing with Cruz, too, is a lot of people forget he still has yet to really amount to what a full season would amount to in terms of at-bats. I think he's creeping up to it now. And it is interesting with Cruz that yesterday, you could tell he's a very outspoken guy when it comes to his body language, his emotions, and all these other things. Like you saw it in the 9th inning last night. Thankfully, he got on from an error there from the Brewers outfielder, threw his bat, but his facial expression said everything. And to me, to a lot of people that would say, oh, that's bad. He doesn't need to do that, blah, blah, blah. Like a lot of people were getting on him for laughing when they were in the middle of the 6-game losing streak and all this other stuff. He's just trying to enjoy the game of baseball, and it shows to me that he cares about the game of baseball. He wants to be good. He wants to be that superstar player that we're hoping that he can be. And I also want to caution people, and because you guys love to compare him so much to another Cruz in the division, Elly De La Cruz didn't exactly have a lot of success last year either in the second half of the year of his short career so far. Cruz and him have played now about almost the same amount, and it might not seem like it, but O'Neal Cruz, I think I agree with you. His stock has to go up. And I agree, Martin Perez being there for him has helped a ton. I think it's something that these veterans are kind of picking him up. You've even seen Kutch kind of slide over and talk to him a little bit and let him know, hey, it's okay. It's fine that these things are happening. You're just learning. And again, he's a 6'7" shortstop, and he's an animal. When he gets going, he gets going. He's an enigma. I mean, I think they said that some coach on the team said, yeah, when you watch him, there's nothing like him. He's a video game character in real life. He just has to tap into that potential a little bit. And when you talk about the big three of this lineup now, we slide to Brian Reynolds, who also has had an interesting start to the year. Brian Reynolds is a guy that, to me, this is how I always say it, Craig. He quietly produces. And when I mean quietly produces, he doesn't really, again, I was talking about emotions wise, how Cruz is a very outspoken guy with his emotions and body language. Brian Reynolds is the complete opposite. He's a guy that usually stays to his chest, doesn't really say much, really doesn't show a lot of emotion at all. And a lot of people would say, Brian Reynolds isn't having the great start that you would want him to have. But right now, his OPS is almost an 800. 3 home runs and 15 RBIs, including the homer that he had last night, 263 average. This is pretty much who he's been over the last 2 or 3 years outside of that enormous 2021 All-Star season that he had. So where do you think the stock on Reynolds is going right now?
I mean, this is another guy, and this is not to be too positive or anything, but it's going up. And I didn't even know what we were going to talk about today, but for some reason I was looking at, since the start of that, losing streak that started, back with the Mets and Boston. I mean, Brian Reynolds is walking more than he's striking out. The slugging hasn't been there completely, but you said that, that home run that he hit last night, but a WRC plus of 140 over that time, only behind Alika Williams and Joey Bart, 2 part-time players who have very small sample sizes. Mm-hmm. So of the regular players that are in there, I mean, Brian Reynolds is actually having one of the best 2-week stretches in there. I think that sometimes he's not seeing the pitches that he wants to, but that's kind of what happens when you're a player that another team scouts. There are certain players on this team that, the pitchers and the catchers, when they're coming in to face them, it's like, okay, who do we need to key in on? And
Yeah.
that's been talked around the league. I mean, that's why it's like when like a rookie pitcher comes up, they can either pitch really well or pitch really bad because there's not a lot of a scouting report on them. If they're hitting their spots, doing whatever, like we saw with the Milwaukee Brewers starter the other night, they can have a really good start and it'd be like, oh, we should light up this rookie. And it's like, well, maybe, but you don't know, and there's not a lot of numbers behind that. But Brian Reynolds is one of those guys they key in on. And to see him kind of take those steps forward, for Brian Reynolds, the big thing is not going into like the types of slumps and stuff that he did last year.
Yeah.
But in the end, I mean, his numbers are going to look, I feel like, pretty consistent across the board. But after, getting off to a pretty hot start to the season and like, the first couple series and then maybe cooling off a little bit, he's playing well, but he's not like playing over his skis or out of his mind. So for me, it's like we're finding a level here. So you could kind of say, yeah, is the stock really going up? Well, it kind of is if he can kind of minimize those like downturns that he has.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect way to put it. He, again, much like Cruz, when Brian Reynolds is on, he's on. He's one of the best switch hitting outfielders in all of baseball when he's hitting the baseball really well. And then he has those big stretches that you mentioned where sometimes you're like, okay, Brian, come back to earth a little bit. Come be average Brian Reynolds. Because I even think an average Brian Reynolds, especially with the way that this lineup has played over the last week and a half, is good. And I would say what he's done over that period of time, over the last 15 games, is what you would expect from Brian Reynolds. I mean, over the last 15 games, you mentioned 11 walks to only 10 strikeouts. The slugging's of 423. You would like that to be a little bit higher, but I think you would like that to be a little bit higher all across the lineup. And we'll talk about that in just a minute with a specific player whose stock might be down right now, Craig, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. Before we do, though, let's hear from Policy Genius in Monopoly Go. Today's episode of Locked On Pirates is brought to you by Policygenius. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time when you head to policygenius.com/lockedonmlb, because Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. And with Policygenius, you can find insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some of those options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policygenius gives you unbiased advice from a licensed expert support team. They have no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so that you can trust their guidance. And thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers who found the best fit for their needs are just what Policygenius is about. So check life insurance off your to-do list today in no time with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonmlb or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonmlb. Today's episode of Locked On Pirates is also brought to you by Monopoly Go. Download the Monopoly Go app free on the App Store and Google Play, because, folks, I know you love the classic board game Monopoly, and if you like leaderboards as well, you're going to want to get in on Monopoly Go. You've probably heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times, and it's a great mobile twist on classic Monopoly that you can play anywhere, anytime. You explore hundreds of Monopoly boards from Las Vegas to Camelot to the moon, all while racking in a huge fortune. But my favorite part is the leaderboards, where you can see who's a Monopoly tycoon and who's gone bankrupt. So go get yourself on the charts and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store and Google Play, to relive some of your childhood with Monopoly Go. And of course, thank you to all of our sponsors here on the Locked On Pirates podcast, because also you can find this show on Locked On Sports Today, the 24/7 streaming channel brought to you by all the hosts of Locked On, where you get all of your news and analysis on everything in the sports world from your local host of Locked On. That could be Locked On Steelers. You know, there's Craig, I think there's something big going on in Pittsburgh sports tonight, later on this evening, that Christopher Carter over at Locked On Steelers, who does a phenomenal job, will be all over. But you can find Locked On Sports Today, Chris Carter's podcast, and all the podcasts on the 24/7 streaming channel Locked On Sports Today on Amazon Fire TV and YouTube. So go check that out. And we're doing stock up, stock down today. We've hit two guys that are up to start the show, and Brian Reynolds and O'Neill Cruz, who have had quite the success, I would say, over the last couple of days and the last week and change. A guy, though, that I think we expected a little bit more out of to start the year is Jack Suwinski. And Jack Suwinski is a guy that's very hard to judge right now. Hitting 179, OPS of 556, 2 homers, 7 RBIs. Obviously, a lot of that coming from that grand slam that he had in Philadelphia. But when you look at what Jack Suwinski has done this year, and the whole thing has been he can't hit lefties, blah, 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 blah. Well, folks, he's hitting 389 against lefties and 179 or 117 against right-handed pitchers right now. And Jack is one of those guys that, again, we've been talking about a lot of these players, and it almost culminates into the whole offense. It doesn't seem like these guys can go, one of the guys can go cold and the other guys go hot. It seems like they all go hot at one time or they all go cold at another time, and it affects the entire offense. And for a guy like Jack Suwinski, Craig, I would argue that's been the story of his young career. He has those monster stretches. Everybody obviously remembers the 3 home run day against the San Francisco Giants on Father's Day in 2022. We remember the stretch that he had last year as well, where just everything he touched was going over the wall. It just hasn't happened yet this year. And I would also argue a lot of that, to the point that you also made earlier, is the amount of lefties that they faced. But again, he's hit them pretty well. So maybe should Derek Shelton throw him in there more against lefties? And is his stock up or down right now?
I would probably say that his stock is down. But when Jack Suwinski's stock is down, you, like you said before, you're waiting for that complete angle up. And but I think we've kind of been waiting for that even after that grand slam he hit. Listening to the broadcast, I know that, John Wayner has said it looks like he's about to go on a heater. Matt Capps has also mentioned that. They've talked about it in the pregame and stuff. And in last night's game, I mean, he absolutely crushed a ball that he was ahead of, and it was slightly foul, but it was almost more of that Jack Suwinski swing that you're looking for. Has actually, played pretty good defense in the outfield over the past few days, has made some kind of circus type catches. I don't know what Jack Suwinski, what I'm looking for from him is a guy who hits around 220 and hits about 25 home runs and maybe isn't your most consistent producer in the lineup. But at this point in time, it really hasn't even been that. You can see some frustration from him. And when you think he is going to get going, then he has 3 or 4 strikeouts the next game. Until I see that 1 week stretch from him where he's absolutely out of his mind, I can't really say his stock's going to be going up. But the way that Jack's played is, after that 1 week stretch, you can almost think about his stock going down. So I think a lot of this has to do with just kind of all the bats being cold at the same time. And he kind of maybe even just gets lost in the shuffle. Looking at his stuff over here, I mean, he's got a 54 WRC plus in that same time that Brian Reynolds, has that 140 over the past couple of weeks. So, yeah, I mean, I think you have to say stock down, but I mean, at some point in time, it has to get turned on here. I don't know. The other part, I think, to me is I keep on thinking about the outfield alignment and how much it's changing and how inconsistent it's been in different stuff. And I'm wondering how much is transferring over into the hitting. I do like having, the options of Olivares and Connor Joe playing left field last night was kind of strange to me because he has probably about the least amount of range of any player.
Yeah.
He really hurt them in any ways, but I don't see how that really helps. I think if he's in the game in the outfield, he should be in right field, maybe center, but that left field, it's so cavernous. But that's maybe getting away from the point. But with Jack, like, I feel like he needs like consistency, and he hasn't had it this year in the field or at the plate. So for right now, his stock is down, but just the way he hit the ball last night, I feel like he hit it pretty well most of the times he was on there. And I mean, I hate to mention the umps, but the one strikeout call that he did have last night, the ball was clearly outside, never came back in. Walk and Brownie were both surprised by the call. But that's the thing. If you get yourself down 0-2, you're kind of, up against it. So you really can't blame a call like that. I mean, I'll go back to Little League is like my son got called on what I thought was an outside strike, but I'm like, if you would have swung or hit those two down the middle, that one doesn't even matter. So for Jack, would like to see him get going here, but for right now, the stock has to be down.
And great point that you make too. Another split that I think is very interesting with Jack Sawinski is when he's ahead in the count, he has a 1.010 OPS. When he's behind in the count, that OPS drops to a 269 in a very similar at-bat window. I believe it's 20 to 15, 15 being the latter, being behind in the count. But that's something that I think is very interesting as well. And another guy that I think will be pretty chalk on this one and be pretty quick, Henry Davis. Man, what we've seen from Henry Davis so far has not been what we wanted to see from Henry Davis so far. And it's going to create, I think, an interesting dynamic for this team when Yasmani Grandal, who they acquired in the offseason, is ready to go from his rehab assignment. I don't know if you're really comfortable sending down a guy like Edward Olivares, or if you're comfortable sending down an Alika Williams or one of these guys that you want to send down. So Henry Davis almost feels like just the only casualty of that move that you're going to see. And it's really his play that has kind of dictated that. And I don't think that we're really going to disagree here on saying his stock is down. And I wouldn't even argue. And I think it's also interesting that the whole conversation around Davis last year was, well, he can't play catcher defensively. I haven't seen any issues this year. The only issue that I've seen is an issue that I didn't think I'd have to see, and that was with the bat. And I think that that's one thing that Henry especially is going to want to fix in the coming weeks.
That's a tough thing right here, man. Because I mean, I just had a conversation with somebody like through the X sphere, the Twitter sphere, and we're talking about that yesterday. Is just because on our show this past week, a couple days ago, Chris and I had talked about what happens when Yasmani Grandal comes back, and it almost had to be Henry Davis going down to AAA to maybe get some of that confidence back. Mm-hmm. And a piece of that maybe I didn't mention during the show was that, I mean, if you want to get the bat going and you want to carry quote unquote 3 catchers, then you would have to see more time with Henry Davis at the DH position. But you have Andrew McCutchen heating up at the same point right now. So do you really want to take at bats away from Kutch? Because, I mean, Kutch is a notoriously slow starter, also didn't have much time in spring training. Never going to be like the Kutch of old, but you may get that in spurts. You may hit that little bit of a renaissance or whatever it may be from him. So, yeah, with him, it's like you can't really do that because you don't want to stick him out in right field again if you send Olivares down. For me, I mean, I think that AAA is when Yasmani, if he does come back, because, I mean, Chris and I have also mentioned the injury history with Yasmani Grandal is one injury goes away and then it turns into a back or a knee or something else. So until he's actually back up here. But yeah, with him, that bat is the most important thing, and seeing just a ton of frustration from him, even when he does kind of get it going for a game or two, the streak it doesn't stick. So, I mean, for him, I think it was Jim Stam from Pirates Fan Forum. I saw him tweet last night. Was at the game over the weekend. And he thought he saw that, his stance had changed a little bit. He was standing a little bit more upright. And then it was definitely confirmed by his stance last night. We all know that he went to Driveline over the offseason to work on that. So maybe he even just needs just a little bit of time off to get that working, do more than just like 1 or 2 days in the cage while Joey Bart's in.
Yep.
But right now, I mean, you have to say the stock is down just from, our expectations, and maybe our expectations were a little bit too high from the way he was hitting the ball in spring, because as we all know, spring stats really don't matter for anybody unless you're looking to prove a point. If it's a player that you like and is hitting well, then, oh yeah, he's going to be doing great. If it's a player that you don't like that's hitting well, then you're just like, oh, this is a small sample size. So for Henry, stock's down, but I mean, obviously, so young, the least amount of minor league plate appearances by a 1-1 since like the 1970s.
Yep.
I wouldn't see it as a failure if he goes back down. Has worked so hard, has looked, better than we all thought he would behind the plate. But he has to get that bat going, because that's like the most important thing about the future for the Pirates.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree too that I think DHing would actually be quite good for him as well, because we also forget this is the first time he's going into a professional season and exclusively catching. So, he's thinking about that daily too. So I think maybe getting him away from that for a minute and sending him down just to remind himself that he can hit. I think that would be a big thing for him as well. And it doesn't have to be for a long time. It could be for a few weeks, and then you just say, okay, cool. He hasn't done anything that proves he needs to stay down there. Maybe he's just saying, oh, maybe he's just a guy that doesn't need to learn anything in AAA, and it's just going to have to be hard times. And I think a lot of us forget how young these guys are. But in the final segment of today's show, we're going to obviously talk about Jared Jones a little bit and some of the other pitchers on their stock in the final segment of today's episode. But before we do that, let's talk about Prize Picks. Today's episode of Locked On Pirates is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the free Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100, because Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It is the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players, because all you do is pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. Spring training is over and baseball season is officially underway. Don't miss your chance to add your favorite players from the diamond in your Prize Picks entries. Whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs, take your pick of more or less and add them to your Prize Picks entry today. And don't forget, you can even get in on the action during NBA's postseason. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100 at Prize Picks, where you pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. And as always, thank you to Policygenius, Monopoly Go, and Prize Picks for being wonderful sponsors of the Locked On Pirates podcast. And on Stock Up or Stock Down, the final group that we're going to talk about is obviously the pitchers. And we'll start with Jared Jones. And I made a comment to you, Craig, before we started recording today, that Jared Jones is really setting the tone for all of these young guys. He really is. And I mean, about the multitude of young pitchers that the Pirates have at their disposal coming through the grapevine that we call, or the pipeline as they like to call it. Obviously, Paul Skeens will be here at some point this season. I would probably still caution people and say it'll probably be early June, late May at the earliest. But then you look at Anthony Solometto and Bubba Chandler and Xander Muth and Thomas Harrington and all these other you're a big prospect guys, so you know these guys. And I think you would agree with me right now that although Jared Jones is not exactly the national media prize, he is kind of setting the tone for everybody that's going to be coming through the pipeline, including Paul Skeens. So I don't think there's really any doubt in anybody's mind that his stock is up right now.
Stock is definitely up. The stuff that he's doing, like you said before we hopped on here, I mean, what he's doing is historic. Even through his first 4 starts, the number of strikeouts and everything that he's doing, there was maybe 4 players, and one was from the 1890s. So, and yeah, I mean, I think it does, even for a pitcher for Paul Skeens, who we had, and it's not still a bad thing if you still do have, higher expectations for him just due to his pedigree. But yeah, I mean, what Jared is doing is kind of like, okay, now that I'm doing this here, I Paul, when you come up, let's match me. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So like, and even for the other pitchers on the staff, I mean, talking about, you know, with Bailey Falter and the way he's performing, I think I saw Hannah Mears just kind of talk about his fastball versus Jared Jones's fastball, and it's just like him being able to have. I just want to have the best fastball I can have. I want to be as close to Jared as I can be. So even with that, it's definitely a crazy thing to watch. Um, and I know that we're probably, just going to come up while we're mentioning this is that, did the bullpen game yesterday, said that Mitch would be going on his, regular spot in the rotation today. Noah Hiles reported it's probably going to be Quinn Priester on Friday. And I think that a piece of this has to do with not only getting Jared Jones a little bit more rest, but I think it might also have to do with getting, Martin Perez an
Mhm.
extra day of rest as well, because he wasn't as sharp the last time he came out. I mean, he is over, he's younger than I am, but, baseball wise, he's a little bit older, and seeing if that extra day of rest will help him. This first time where we're going on like an extended streak, you're going to be traveling, to San Francisco and Oakland and different stuff like that. But I mean, plain and simple, Jared Jones, stock up, doing things that none of us expected him to do,
Yeah.
and just performing, just unbelievable. I mean, for people like that, get frustrated with the Pirates and stuff, it is nice to turn on the TV every 5 to 6 days, watch what this kid is doing, watch the poise that he's doing it with, and just making, like, if you saw the game against Milwaukee, I mean, you had players from Milwaukee looking back at the catcher, looking back at the umpire and being like, is this for real? Like,
Yeah.
is the way he's really pitching? And to me, like, that is just so cool to see.
It is. And to end the show today, I'll kind of pair everybody else, the entirety of the pitching staff, going from the bullpen to the rest of the starters, that being Keller, Perez, Priester, even Gonzalez. I know he's hurt right now, but he looked pretty good as well when things started off. Would you say the stock is up or down on the entirety of the pitching staff to end the show today?
Oh God, Ethan, that's a tough question. I'd say it's a push overall. I feel like some
Hmm.
guys are doing more than what we expected from them. A guy like a Ryder Ryan contributing more, Hunter Stratton contributing more. Seeing stuff from Aroldis Chapman, where I mean, it's what he did at the end of the year with the Rangers, is he'll have a couple good outings and then struggle. And for a relief pitcher, when you look for that across the board, it'll look like some, fairly positive numbers, but there's a lot of ups and downs with that. Of course, I don't know what to say about Mitch Keller right now, because, what I say will be, it'll be history in about a couple hours here,
Hmm.
going up against somebody who's performed, one of the only pitchers in Major League Baseball that's probably performed better than Jared Jones consistently in Peralta this year. But I would say that in general, I do believe that the stock is up. Bailey Falter doing something that none of us really expected him to do.
Yeah.
Martin Perez, performing well. Quinn Priester, want to see his second start, because I don't know. I was at that game on Friday. I don't know how much of it was jitters and how much of it was, what Quinn is going to be, because he
Hmm.
wasn't placing the ball the way he was placing it in his success down in AAA. Bednar coming back out and having some good outings, and then Luis Ortiz having a little bit of a stinker last night. Rowanzi being all over the place and trying to work through stuff. So I think that maybe I will say slightly up, just
Hmm.
because at the beginning of the season we thought that the at least the starters were going to be more of the question marks, and then especially with Majinski and Holderman's injuries at the beginning of the year, thinking the bullpen might be having a little bit of struggles, but has been doing, fairly well. So
Yeah.
I would say the stock would have to be up a little bit at this point in time. But as with the bullpen, You could talk to me in about a week and it'll be completely different. And it could be the same for the pitching staff. It's going to depend on, their next few outings here. Looking to see if Perez, if he's coming on, Saturday, if he's bouncing back, and then, seeing Jared Jones hopefully on Sunday. So we'll see.
Oh, yeah, of course. And that's stock up, stock down, guys. Obviously, these kind of things can change all the time. Probably do one maybe the end of May, because you can obviously talk about this kind of topic all the time. But, folks, thank you for tuning in to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. Again, my name is Ethan Smith. Follow me right there on social media at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates. You can find Craig at Buck's Basement. And, Craig, what do you got for the people going this week, for the rest of the week, and maybe even next week?
For the rest of this week, I had to skip my minor league news and brews. I guess I didn't have to, but had a brother-in-law boys baseball weekend, so I was at the games on Friday and Saturday and stuff. So I'm going to be talking about the pitch counts, the ups and downs, the innings pitched throughout the system. And next week, we'll see what Chris and I get into, but I think it's a time to look back at what I talked about a couple weeks ago with Brian Hayes, his launch angle, pulling the ball, and exit velocity, and kind of check in to see what progress or lack of progress he may have made during that time. So that's what's coming up. And Ethan, it's good to be back on here, man. Great talk.
Always, yeah. And thank you guys for tuning in. Find this show on all of your audio platforms or on YouTube. You can also find it on Amazon Fire TV. Hit that subscribe button. We're on the road to 2,000. We're getting there, guys. But thank you so much for tuning in to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on Thursday, April 25th. We'll be back tomorrow. But until then, see you on the flip side.